Hi there, welcome back to On the Flip Side. My name is Adam Shawalker, your host, and today we're going to be checking out this new album from Matt Pike, Pike vs. the Automaton. Matt Pike, guitar player from Sleep and frontman of the Grammy Award-winning High on Fire, has stepped out from underneath the banner of these two projects to release his first official solo record. So this album is a pretty great example of getting exactly what I expected, almost to a fault. Matt Pike seems to have this kind of musical equivalent to being typecast. There's a sound that he's been building over the course of his career that is very, very consistent, and with the exception of maybe like 2 tracks here, he runs a very formulaic course. And don't get me wrong though, it's a pretty good formula for the most part, and there's a reason he's a beloved guitar player, but I do think that there was more room for experimentation on this album. This new album, this solo project, had no reason to commit to the styles that his other bands already do, but what a lot of the tracks here sound like are collections of like High on Fire riffs and lyrics with the occasional slower like Sleep riff ripping through the mix. It does just kind of seem like a bit of a waste of potential for a fresh project like this. Like, if this is your solo debut, what would the point of any of this be if it already so easily fits under the umbrella of like one of your other groups very easily? The first song, Abusive, sounds like something that could have very easily ended up on Electric Messiah. The guitar roars, the drums pummel you through the entire song, the bass is the one of the loudest things in the mix, and the whole time Matt Pike is doing his best on vocals to in fact remind you that this is a song that sounds like you could have already heard it before maybe a few years ago. It's still a pretty good track as far as a lot of the songs on this album go. It's just maybe could have been thought through a little bit more, which, I mean, compared to a lot of the other tracks in this album, is pretty nice. Throat Cobra sees Pike reaching into a bit more of like a punk rock or hardcore sound that is actually pretty fresh for him, though the style of punk he's tapping here doesn't really lend itself to very long track lengths, and for like a 5-minute song, this track may as well be 20 minutes as it goes on for a little bit too long. The guitar solo is admittedly pretty sick, though it does seem that one of the things that this album does very right is generally nailing the guitar tone in the mix. Trapped in a Mid-Cave channels the big Sleep riffs and throws them right up front. There's a pretty cool mix of heavy guitars with some kind of weird percussion work, and I don't really know what they're doing with this kit, if they're just kind of hitting like a wood block, or maybe they're doing like a bunch of like rim shots, but it does get my attention pretty well. There are definitely a lot of moments here where this track sounds very similar to like the Melvins, especially on the vocal end. I think the only issue I have with this track is that the runtime is just incredibly inflated at about 8.5 minutes, which after a few listens does seem pretty unnecessary. This song does do a decent job building itself up for some cool moments, but it very easily could have been more compact as a listen, and some fat could have been trimmed. Epoxy is kind of a cool, odd little interlude track that I think works pretty well here. It sounds like kind of like a small jam session snippet that works decently enough as a lead into the next track. Land is probably the most creative track on the record, featuring Brent Hinds from Mastodon for this kind of jangly, almost like Tom Waits style shanty tune. And when I said this album doesn't stray too much from Pike's formula, with the exception of a couple tracks, I am referring to this song mostly. This is a brilliant palate cleanser of a song, and an entirely fresh cut compared to the rest of this album. I really love this track. It's kind of the darling child of the album to me. And I really wish there were more attempts like this from artists who have been kind of traditionally been stuffed into like a creative box. This is just a really wonderful listen, and something that I did not know that I needed in this style. Alien Slut Mum pretty much just drops a brick through the window in how immediate this song ramps up energy after the last track. This song, while not on any kind of subtle side, is incredibly fun with a blistering pace and ripping drums that, probably make for the best heavy track on the record. I do think at this point in the album, though, I am getting a little bit tired of the way that they've mixed the vocals. It's kind of like they've purposely blew out as much of the dynamics in the microphones as possible. It does tend to work and to lend itself to a lot of the tracks on this album. This is a track where I think, I wish things had been a little bit more varied on that front, because it really limits a lot of the sound for this song, and it could have added a little bit more impact in the delivery on a lot of the lines on this track. And I do think that there's moments on this song that get very close to remedying that, but the mix flattens the vocals so much, it's really barely noticeable for that effort at all. It's just pretty disappointing. Apollyon does a pretty decent job keeping itself in check for the most part, and mostly justifies its track length with some kind of out there moments. I do like, the beginning of this song. It sounds very much like a track that could kind of feature Les Claypool at some points. It does seem like a lot of the creative influences here are very much worn on the sleeve. I just wish that there was a little bit more sensitivity in some of the way that these sounds are kind of blended with the dense gain force that is Matt Pike's guitar tone. Of course, there's very little room for compromise when it comes to that, but it still seems that like what normally would be a delicate balance in writing is kind of completely overblown by the need for the guitar to just be always the main focus. And there's a bit of a split in this song right in the middle of the track that segments the track in a way that I would call a little bit less than graceful. And while there's some kind of neat moments in the second half of the song, it struggles mostly due to the fact that Matt Pike's vocals on this song just very plainly aren't all that great. We do get a pretty solid guitar solo though to wrap up the track, so that ends up being a little bit of a decent silver lining. Acid Test Zone is a great follow-up track for the last song. This is a much quicker, in-your-face kind of blast-off riffs with some like really odd sample work jammed into some of the song's transitions. Pike is really reaching into some hardcore vocals for this one, and they're actually quite good. This to me really is a good track length for this album. Anything after like 6 or so minutes seems to lose itself in its ambition, whereas these short and to-the-point songs are incredibly well put together in most cases. Latin American Geological formation very quickly finds itself burning through its good ideas in the first couple minutes of the song. The mix on this one is particularly muddy for no apparent reason. There are moments where Matt Pike's vocals come through clear as day, but everything else is a kind of a complete mess to listen to, so it's really hard to tell what the intent was in the way that this song was produced. Like, I don't get the decisions behind half of the reasons that this song sounds the way it does. It really is just kind of a wonder how the mixing on this album is just so all over the place too. And there's some like really great bones here of like potentially really excellent tracks, and they're just wrapped in some really hideous production work. And by the time this song is like halfway over, there's little to nothing to say about its first half. It's incredibly disappointing how forgettable most of this song is. I think most of these issues could be fixed with like a remix of this track and fixing the incredibly muddy production. The final song, Leaving the Wars of Woe, is really the ultimate culmination of all of the things that I found particularly bad that this album did. This almost 11-minute track has some of the driest writing on the album and some of the worst vocal work on the album. I do really wish though that the song was like maybe gutted or reworked for its pretty like excellent guitar solos, but as it sits, it's kind of just a bloated track with particularly bad production. And there's some like glimmers of hope in this track that are very just quickly trampled on to make way for more questionable writing choices. The solo that starts around like 4 minutes into this track or so is actually really excellent, but it's sandwiched between some very sonically bland and unremarkable landscapes. Which really is a shame, because for a brief moment I was absolutely enthralled with this track, but it grabs you with a very weak grip and it very easily kind of slips away from you. And all of this is going on, like all of this is just kind of disappointing with a very firm lack of destination that this song seems to have, or I guess not have. Like this song just doesn't know where it's going at any given point. So what we have is an album with a lot of tried and true formulas absolutely beaten to death, and a handful of songs that are semi-decent and maybe 2.5 really excellent tracks. I do really wish that I liked this album more. I was incredibly excited to hear what this whole thing was going to sound like, and in the end what we have is just an album with not much to say or not much of an interest with doing much of anything at all. I really wish that there were some more moments that grabbed so strongly, like Land or Acid Test Zone, but as it stands I just am not really feeling most of this album. Pike versus the Automaton is a firm 4. Thank you all so much for watching. Tell me what you thought of the album in the comments below. If you liked this video, consider subscribing and drop a like on this video, and if you would like to support the channel further, maybe check out my Reverb store or my Instagram. Links to those are both in the description below. Thank you all so much again, and we'll see you on the flip side.